Shalom in the name of Yehoshua HaMashiach, and welcome to this video which is investigating the teachings of Shaul, of Paul of Tarsus, concerning circumcision. Now, anyone who's spent any amount of time around Christians knows that the Christian position is that circumcision is not necessary, and in actual fact circumcision is to be avoided, and those who become circumcised are in grave danger of basically apostatizing, of falling away from the faith. This has been the position of Christianity for the best part of the last 2,000 years, and they didn't get this from thin air. This teaching, this understanding came directly from the writings of Paul. So this video we're going to be looking at some of the things that he said concerning circumcision. We're going to start with the infamous Galatians epistle, and we're going to start in chapter 5 and verse 1. In the freedom with which Messiah has made us free, stand firm then, and do not again be held with a yoke of slavery. See, I, Shaul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Messiah shall be of no use to you. That's strong words. So, according to Shaul, he said that those believers who had become circumcised, Messiah would be of no use. And I witness again to every man being circumcised that he is a debtor to do the entire Torah. And Paul's saying that he said that in a negative way, meaning this isn't a good thing to have to keep the whole Torah. Verse 4, you who were declared right by Torah have severed yourselves from Messiah. You have fallen from favor. For we in spirit, by belief, eagerly wait the expectation of righteousness. For in Messiah Yehoshua neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any strength, but belief working through love. So basically, taken together, Paul was saying that if anybody gets circumcised because they are seeking to be declared right according to Torah, they're going by the commandments, and they believe that in order to fulfill, the righteous requirements, they should get circumcised. Paul said that that person seeking to be declared right by Torah is severing themselves from Yehoshua. This is not a teaching that is contained anywhere else from the Torah. It's not in the prophets, it's not in Yehoshua's words or the apostles' words. This is a Paul-only teaching. He says, in Messiah Yehoshua, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any strength or is of any note, but belief working through love. Again, he's saying clearly that circumcision is not important. In Yehoshua, anyway, in Yehoshua, whether you're circumcised or whether you're not circumcised is of no consequence. He says the same thing in the next chapter, chapter 6, verse 15, after he's spent a little bit of time attacking those who are teaching circumcision. He says, for in Messiah Yehoshua neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any strength but a renewed creature. Again, the point is clear. According to Paul, this is an irrelevant subject. Circumcision is irrelevant one way or the other. Or really, based on what he said previously, if the person who seeks to get circumcised in order to be declared right by Torah is actually in big trouble. This is not contradictory. It's hypocritical, because we know from the book of Acts that Paul actually circumcised Timothy. We see this in Acts chapter 16 verse 3. Shaul wished to have this one, i.e. Timothy, go with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Yehudim who were in those places, i.e. in Asia Minor and elsewhere, for they all knew that his father was Greek. So it was okay for Shaul to circumcise Timothy for the basis of being able to preach his gospel and not have hindrances to that. That's okay, apparently. But it's not okay to get circumcised in order to be declared right by Torah. This is strange teaching and completely unscriptural. There is a place where Paul actually tells people do not get circumcised. He's said it already, basically, in Galatians 5. But when we look at 1 Corinthians 7, he expressly says it in as many words. He says in verse 17, he says, "Only as the Mighty One has distributed to each one, as the Master has called each one, so let him walk. And so I order in all the assemblies." So this teaching now we're going to read, this is teaching which Paul taught everywhere that he went to, in Ephesus, in Corinth, in Thessalonica, etc. This is what he taught everywhere. He said, he taught this was his teaching. "Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not be circumcised." And he says again, circumcision is nothing and the uncircumcision is nothing, but the guarding of the commandments of the Mighty One does matter. So again, let's look at it. He said, if someone was circumcised when they became a believer in Yehoshua, let him not become uncircumcised. And if you read First Maccabees, you'll see that this was something that people could actually do to try and hide, and can actually do to try and hide their circumcision. Then he says, don't do that. Don't do that. That, again, circumcision is not important. Don't try and hide your circumcision. But then he says, was anyone called while uncircumcised, i.e. you Goyim and Israelites who maybe for some reason weren't circumcised, let him not be circumcised. So Paul expressly taught everywhere in all the assemblies that he had authority in that people who was uncircumcised when they became believers should not become circumcised. I suggest again that this is open rebellion against the commandments of Yahweh, because in teaching people not to become circumcised, he's teaching people to disobey the commandments. And for those who try and say that Paul taught people to keep the feast and this, that and the other, this removes the possibility of these people, all the Goyim and all the Israelites in all the places where Paul taught and weren't circumcised. They could not go and keep the Passover if they obeyed Paul's teachings, because they would not be circumcised. Now when he says that circumcision is irrelevant but the guarding of the commandments is what matters, don't be confused by thinking that he's saying that it's the keeping of the Torah that matters. You've got to understand with Paul that he believed that his teachings were actually the commandments of Yah. And he says it in several places. In the same letter, for example, he says in chapter 14, verse 37, "If anyone thinks himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge what I write to you, that they are a command of the Master." And he said it as well in 1 Thessalonians and elsewhere, that he believed that the commandments that he gave in his letters were the commandments of the Most High Yah. So when he says that circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing but keeping the commandments of the Mighty One, he's talking about the commandments which he taught. He's not talking about the commandments in Torah, because obviously that would be an enormous contradiction, because the Torah does command circumcision. Again, the challenge, the request to all of you who are Torah obedient and who believe in Yehoshua, those of you who are following the teachings of Paul, how do you understand these statements of Paul when he says don't be circumcised, circumcision is nothing, those who become circumcised sever themselves from Mashiach? How do you understand these, and how can you reconcile these statements with the idea that Shaul taught according to Torah?